Well, hello there, and welcome to my Almost Midlife Crisis, the show that dives into that tricky time in our lives when we're no longer young, but we aren't old yet either. I'm your host, Jennifer Villamel. Today, we're talking about being pregnant at 39, or what the medical community calls a geriatric pregnancy. Yeah, that fun little label is true, and it's definitely brought to you by a bunch of male doctors, I'm sure, because I can't imagine a female coming up with that term. I'm in my second trimester and I'll be turning 40 before my little girl is born. And I have to say that being pregnant later in life, I mean, it has its risks, but also maybe it has some unintended rewards. So I'd love to dive into my pregnancy journey, really in hopes that some of you are going to be able to relate and maybe give some of you some hope. So let's get started. For those of you that listened to last season, you know that I was an almost middle aged bride this past July 2021. And I was supposed to get married in May 2020, but then a little global pandemic hit. And well, like a lot of couples all around the world, our plans had to change. So we moved our wedding back three times. First, it was August 2020, which I think we were a little bit more optimistic about this whole COVID thing then. Then it was May 2021. And we actually had a non related COVID calendar conflict that forced us to move it one more time to July 2021. But we were like, if we're going to move it again, like now's the time. So every time we moved it back, it was hard because honestly, at one point, I just felt like this is never going to happen. But what really made it hard was that it meant also pushing back our attempt to conceive and start a family of our own. You know, we could have been one of those couples that had the Zoom wedding and then had the reception at some later point. But I waited almost 40 years to get married to begin with, and we got engaged 8 years into our relationship. So we really wanted to celebrate with our friends and family. Like, we didn't want to settle, we wanted our big day. And it didn't make it easier that some of our closest loved ones actually had to travel from not just around the US, but also outside of the country. So each time we pushed it back, we were hoping that we would have a better chance of those that were on the top of our list, that they would be able to travel and to witness our special day, but to obviously do it safely. So at the same time, I was becoming increasingly concerned that these delays would potentially be like the make or break of our ability to have kids. So when we got engaged, I would have gotten married at 37, and our first couple shifts would have put me at 38. And then moving into July 2021 meant that I would be almost 39, like literally 2 weeks before I was 39. So before I was 40, no, before I was 39. I really like jumped the gun on that 40 thing. I'm turning 40 this year. Losing my mind. Pregnancy brain. We're going to blame it on pregnancy brain. While any of these options still qualified me for a geriatric pregnancy, for some reason, I just had it in my head that I had to get pregnant prior to 40. Like if I wanted any chance of natural conception. I have no idea if this is true. I am not a doctor. But it's the timeline that like was just in my head that I was working under. So let's talk about the geriatric pregnancy. First of all, the name sucks. Okay, seriously. Like, could we not have come up with a better name? Like, we had to use an adjective that literally means old people. Like, F you, medical community. Maybe use a little EQ next time you want to come up with a name. But the unfortunate reality is that it's called a geriatric pregnancy because your age brings increased pregnancy risks, kind of similar to that of old people and their healthcare. So they say that like when you get into your 40s, when you have different things hurt and you have aches and pains, your doctor just starts saying like, well, that's a part of aging, almost like they give up because you're getting older and your body is just breaking down. Well, that's pretty much a geriatric pregnancy. The older a woman gets, the more things just don't work as well as if they would have in their 20s. So for example, you have less viable eggs to begin with, because your body has been consistently releasing non-fertilized eggs since your first period. Fun fact I learned during my journey that geriatric pregnancies are more likely to have multiples, like twins or triplets. And not just because there's an increased chance of people using IVF, but because your body is literally increasing the rate in which it's releasing or getting rid of eggs. So basically, your ovaries are just giving up on the possibility of having kids. And there's this like clearance sale of eggs from your body, like stores closing, everything must go. Like you get an egg, you get an egg, just like get rid of them. So the chance of miscarriages when during a geriatric pregnancy increases by 20 to 30%. And your chance of birth defects increase dramatically every single year. So, for example, if you're 20, your risk, which is too young, by the way, too young to have a kid at 20. But if you're 20, your risk of having a baby with Down syndrome is 1 in 2,000, which honestly is still higher than I would have expected, if I'm being honest. At 35, that jumps to 1 in 350. And at 40, that's 1 in 100. Oh, and 45, it's 1 in 30. 1 in 30. Women also have more of a chance of other super fun side effects like gestational diabetes and blood clots, and more of a chance of a C-section and hypertension because our bodies just are not in their prime anymore. Sorry. And we also have a harder time bouncing back because our metabolism has slowed since our 20s, and it's harder for us to lose weight in general. Now, all of this information sucks. And listen, I feel the same way, but before you're like, all right, shut this off, I don't want to hear this shit anymore. It is scientific fact, so we do need to deal with it. We need to know about it, but it's not all bad. Okay. There are actually multiple studies that have shown that older moms tend to be better educated and have higher incomes and therefore can provide better resources for their children. It's also shown, which I mean, that's no surprise. Like you're farther along in your career, therefore you have more resources. But it's also shown that older moms, I like this one, tend to live longer. Okay, like I'll take that. And the children of older moms may end up healthier, more well educated, and more well adjusted and better educated. Which don't shoot the messenger. I'm just reporting what the study showed. But you know what? Those are some major upsides, if you ask me. So after waiting until 39 to get married, almost 39, we started trying right away. Hell, I was taking prenatals like 6 months before the wedding to prepare because I read some article online that it helps if you're 35 and older to have a healthier pregnancy, which again, I'm not a doctor, but honestly, I was like, what's the harm in some extra vitamins? Anyway, the ironic thing is that it wasn't until my mid 30s that I was even sure I wanted a kid. Like I'd gone back and forth on this my whole life. And it wasn't until I thought I was pregnant at one point that my mindset totally changed. So for the first time, I took a pregnancy test and I felt this like ping of disappointment when it was negative, which like, yeah, that was a shock to me because my whole life, if I got a negative pregnancy test, I was like, yes, no kid for me. But like this time I was actually kind of sad. And it was actually really shocking because it was only a couple days before we were supposed to go to Argentina, and like half the trip was dedicated to wine country in Mendoza. So being pregnant would have really put a damper on that trip. But that realization that maybe I did want the option of having a kid made me go to a fertility clinic just to get some testing done and like see where I was at. So in my mind, I was thinking like, I'm going to go freeze my eggs. Like that's easy. I'll just do that. And that bides me some time. Right. And if I want to have kids at some point, that I can, but like right now maybe isn't the best time. So after all the tests, the doctor said that they recommended to freeze my eggs over the age of 35. She would recommend 2 rounds based on where I was at. So that means, because it's like, well, 2 rounds, like that doesn't sound so bad. Yeah, that's what I thought. So 2 rounds at 6 months each. So a year of my life of giving blood and getting it checked at the actual doctor's office multiple times a week, not working out for a year, and giving myself 365 injections with a needle. Yeah. This girl who works out 5 to 6 days a week for not just my physical health, but mental sanity wouldn't be able to work out for a year. Like this girl who can't even look at a needle at the doctor office without giving blood has to like when I give blood, I'm like totally like this the whole time. That girl needs to stick it in myself, a needle in myself every single day. Oh, and by the way, this whole thing would cost about $20,000 to $30,000 because none of it is covered by my insurance. And after all of that, to even use the eggs, that doesn't count actually using them once you freeze them. So then we would need to do IVF, which also is most not likely covered by insurance and costs an average of like $18,000 per cycle, not including like drugs or any of that. And after a year and IVF, there is no guarantee I could actually get pregnant. And I will say, I was not expecting that. Like, I remember leaving the doctors, and we were in a cab, and I was just crying. I was so upset. I was so frustrated because for the first time, I felt the weight of my decision to wait to have kids. And I was now starting to feel this like full impact of my decision to focus on my career and my relationship ahead of kids. And it made me angry. It made me angry that this pressure even exists. It made me angry that if I wanted to give myself the just insurance of frozen eggs, that all of this would come at my expense. And I'm not talking about money, right? Because Christian would have split it with me. I mean, the money part sucks for sure. And for those women that don't have, the finances, it makes it impossible, which just isn't even fair. But that's, you know what, that's a political conversation. And we're going to say we don't talk about politics on this podcast. But I'm talking about the physical and mental toll that this whole process would take. Like that would fall on me. The impact of hormones on my body and my mind. The negative physical, mental consequences of removing fitness from my life. I mean, Christian and I, most people are like, so I can get a doctor's note where I don't have to work out for a year and I have an excuse not to work out. That's not how I felt about it. Like Christian and I are really active people and we're always signing up for races. And we're both really consistent with our workout routines. And the idea of watching him continue to be able to do physical challenges while I sat on the sidelines honestly made me truly concerned that I was going to get jealous. And having to go through all of this and potentially never actually being able to conceive made me concerned that I would come to resent this man that I love, resent him for waiting so long to get married when honestly I was ready to years prior. So after a lot of thought and a lot of discussion, we decided that, you know what, like this isn't our journey. This isn't how we're going to go. It's other people's journeys and that's great. But like, we're going to give it our best shot to get pregnant naturally. And if that doesn't work, then it just wasn't meant to be. So once we got married, I was ready to start. I was ready to go. I was like, ring on finger, let's get going. I had been taking my prenatals. And I had multiple apps, not just one, like multiple apps that helped me track to my ovulation. And I was even cutting down on my drinking. I was doing all of these just to give us like the best chance. But each month when I would get my period, I would feel this like little sense of failure. Like, why was it so hard? As women, our whole lives, we're taught that if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant at any point. Anytime, like sex equals pregnancy. Well, first of all, I call bullshit on that. Okay. Like, why weren't we told the truth growing up? Like, and when I have my little girl, like, I'm going to make sure she understands what like the real timeline is. Okay. Because it's not whenever you have sex. In reality, there's like this small window of 3 to 5 days tops. And outside of that, it's like a less than 1% chance that you would get pregnant. My whole life, getting my period gave me this like sigh of relief that I wasn't pregnant. And now for the first time, it gave me concern that my parents might have been right this whole time. Because let's face it, as an elder millennial, having your parents right is one of the worst consequences that I could imagine. Like, what if they were right that I should have prioritized my personal life over my career? What if they were right that I waited too long to start a family? What if my past choices were now going to prevent me from having a future that I only even recently realized I even wanted? And the scariest part is that I didn't have all the time in the world, that our time is actually limited. And for the first time in my life, I felt that pressure, the pressure of time. But each month, we did our best, like we promised each other. So in early November, my apps, the multiple apps on my phone, started to ask me, like, did you get your period yet? Like, you should check. You didn't get your period. You should take a test. Because according to their algorithm, I was late. So I took a test and it was positive. And I could not believe it. I mean, I seriously could not believe it. I actually took another test because I had never seen a positive test in my life. So I took another one and that was positive too. So I told Christian when he came home from work, and we went to dinner and we celebrated, and we were talking about the nursery and like, is it going to be a boy or a girl and what sports were we going to put them in? And we were all in and we were so excited. And that was until 3 days later when I started spotting. And the next day I had my period. Like, what just happened? I was so confused and I was crushed. Like, did I just miscarry? I saw our dream slip away and we only got to relish in it for like a couple days. So I went to the doctor and they told me I had a chemical pregnancy. Like, what the hell is that? Like, seriously, never in my life had anyone ever told me about a chemical pregnancy. I had never heard about it. And for those of you that also are in the dark on this phenomenon, it's when your egg is fertilized and becomes an embryo, but you lose it within the first like 5 weeks. And what makes it a chemical pregnancy is that because you have an embryo, you start like producing the pregnancy hormone, which gives you a positive test, but it ends super early and there's never a fetus. And a lot of times it never even implants in your uterus. So according to my doctor, apparently these are super common. Like, to the point where most women don't even realize they've had one because it happens so fast. They just think that their period started a couple days late. But if you're actively trying and you're using at-home tests, you're actually more likely to know because you're testing early, and at-home tests are actually very accurate, which I guess that's a good thing. I mean, we want accuracy when we're taking these things. In a way, the idea that it's so common was helpful, but the loss of what could have been still hurt. And what helped me get through it, though, was hope. Because prior to this, I was scared that I couldn't get pregnant. Like, it wasn't when I get pregnant. I was like, if I can get pregnant. But to me, this was my body maybe making it past the first step. Like, we created an embryo. My body and his sperm were completely capable of producing an embryo. And that's step one. So through the use of condoms and birth control, I'd been telling my body to literally not do this for 20 years. And it made sense that my uterus needed maybe like a practice run before the real deal. Like, you don't go run a marathon without training. So to me, this is my body training for the real deal. This time it was an embryo. Next time, maybe a baby. At least that was what I hoped. So when I got my period in January, it was officially 6 months without success. So I talked to my doctor and I got a prescription for Clomid, a pill that helps women get pregnant. And I'm not a doctor, but apparently it helps increase your ovulation and makes your ovulation timing like super exact. So you know exactly when it's going to happen, and you can increase your chance of conception. And it's most commonly used for women over 35, and it has seen a lot of success. So now the trick is that there's a very specific process that you use the pill, and our schedule in February wasn't going to work because Christian was headed to Israel for like 2 weeks for school right at the time that I would be ovulating. So we'd have to wait until March to give it a try. But we had it. That's okay. I had the pill. We were ready to go. And because I accepted a new position for work, yeah, that same one that I talked about last episode that I was laid off. Yeah. So I accepted that new position and I started the first week in February. So that month I was going to be busy anyway, right? I had resigned from my previous role back in December. I'd taken a month off before I started my new position just to like get my head right. And because I was burnt out and I was stressed like half the population, it seemed, and I needed a break. But I was excited to start my new role, and we would be, we could pick up trying to conceive in March. So in the meantime, I was honestly looking forward to just giving myself a break from worrying about conception, because it had been 6 months, and that 6 months of just ups and downs of trying to have a baby, like being hopeful we did our part right on the ovulation days, and then the 2 weeks of hope, waiting to see if it worked or not, and then like the disappointment when we found out that it didn't. So a 2-month break honestly was going to be welcomed prior to starting back up. So that's what we did. We planned a trip to Charleston. We wanted to get out of the cold weather for a couple days before I started my new gig. And then Christian was going to be traveling for 3 out of the next 4 weeks. And after Charleston, I went on a long weekend to Florida with a friend of mine because my mom lives down there. And things were great. Like while we were in Florida, we had so much fun. And my friend actually got her period. And it made me realize that I hadn't started mine. So, I had an abnormal period in January, so I didn't really think much of it. But when we got home, I kept waiting for it to start, and it didn't. So Christian came home from this Miami trip, and I still hadn't gotten it. So I took one test. I had like one test still sitting at home, like left over, and it was positive. But this time we didn't jump for joy like we did the first time. We were cautious. We were scared, honestly, to get too excited in the event that it didn't continue like the last time. So we held in our excitement and we decided to wait a couple more days to see if it stuck. So a couple days later, I took another test and it was positive. And 2 days after that, I had a doctor's appointment for something else. And while I was there, I was like, hey, could I get a blood test? And it was positive too. So it was official. I was pregnant. After multiple tests, I was pregnant. But the thing people don't talk about during those initial weeks of pregnancy is just how lonely it can be. Like, especially after your husband leaves for 2 weeks, only 3 days after your positive blood test. But I found out at 5 weeks that I was pregnant, and we had a full 4 weeks to go until our first prenatal exam. And those 4 weeks were pretty much torture. It was too early to tell people that we were pregnant, just out of fear that we would have to then tell them that we had a miscarriage. But I was definitely feeling pregnant. Like I had all the symptoms, like crazy fatigue that I really could only describe. Like, remember watching Tom and Jerry? When Tom would get super tired and he would try different methods of keeping his eyes open. So he would try to like tape them up, or he would like hold them open with toothpicks. Like that was me. I would be fine 1 minute, and then all of a sudden my eyes were so tired, I physically could not keep them open. And I was nauseous all of the time. Thankfully, I only threw up once. But if I was not eating, I was nauseous. And I was so constipated, which, sorry, maybe it's TMI, but that's reality. And it was the worst symptom of all, because I was so constipated that I had stomach pains, which were so bad that one night I actually was convinced that I had to go to the ER. Oh, and through all of this, I was home alone and I was spending all day on video conferences because my new job had this like video on culture. So I'm sure my colleagues were puzzled why there were days I looked like hell. And this was, I don't know, probably because there was a 3-day span. I felt so bad. I couldn't even bring myself to shower. So thank God they couldn't smell me through the computer. Or maybe they were shocked at how much I ate because I was eating every single meeting, like every single meeting. And the hardest part was just that excruciatingly long wait for that first prenatal appointment. Like I desperately wanted a doctor to look at me and just reassure me that everything looked great. I was so hesitant to allow myself to get too excited until I at least made it to the first appointment. I'm like, we just got to make it to the first appointment. Just make it to the first appointment. And what I didn't realize was that my hesitancy wouldn't be eliminated after that first appointment. There would be more hurdles to overcome. So it had been a journey to get to this point. I had feelings of anger and frustration after going to the fertility doctor. I was hit in the face with this harsh reality that my time wasn't actually unlimited. I feared that I had waited too long and prioritized my life in a way that would prevent me from this next step. And I was terrified that my parents' warnings all these years were valid and I should have listened to them earlier. Even if it was just for a few days, I experienced the feeling of loss from a chemical pregnancy. But here I was at 39 and naturally pregnant. And I realize how lucky I am to not have needed supplements or IVF to get here. And I am so thankful. While 6 months feels like a lifetime, in reality, that's pretty quick, especially for my age. We were one of the lucky ones. And my hope is now that our luck continues as we navigate through this geriatric pregnancy. Ugh, I still cannot say it without just like cringing. We seriously need a new name. So please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Join me on my social channels to get more content and inspiration. You can follow my Almost Midlife Crisis on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can also check out my rest of my YouTube channel with videos and episodes and shorts to keep you entertained all week. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make sure you are always up to date on the latest episodes. And don't forget to sign up for the written transcripts delivered right to your inbox at myalmostmidlifecrisis.com. Until next time.